Lis.
Okay, and you just introduced yourself. Hi, so welcome everybody to Shameless Facebook Friday Live. I'm Dr. Patti Ashley here in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm so excited today to introduce my guest. She's a double board certified adult and child psychiatrist who's changing the way we talk about sex. She's known as the Shameless Psychiatrist and encourages patients to live the no shame lifestyle. Her book, No Shame, Real Talk with Your Kids About Sex, Self-Confidence and Healthy Relationships helps families pass down intergenerational wisdom as opposed to trauma. I love that. By using modern psychotherapy techniques, which she perfected throughout her career. She's an assistant clinical professor at New York Medical College and maintains a bustling practice in the Hamptons where she treats children and families from all backgrounds. Welcome, Dr. Lea Lis.
Thank you very much. That was, oh my God, every time I hear my bio, I'm like, wait, what are they talking about? It's so great.
It is funny, isn't it? Well, welcome. Thanks so much for taking time to be here. I know you have a bustling practice in New York, outside of New York. So thank you for taking the time to be here.
Gosh, it's a pleasure. I love the name Shameless Fridays. How could I say no?
I know, right? And when I saw
have a Shameless Friday, I'm having a Shameless Friday right now with you.
When I saw Shameless Psychiatrist, I thought that was really great. I'm so glad we got to connect. Because my work has been, I'm just knee deep still in the shame research and just loving what I'm discovering and how it's really impacting the work that I do with my clients. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your work?
Sure. Dr. I have psychiatry and mental health has been a calling. I have started in the space at the age of 15 where I worked at Hillside Hospital, and which is a psychiatric hospital in Long Island where I grew up. And, you can take the Long Island out of the girl, but you can't take the girl out of Long Island. So I'm still here practicing in the Hamptons. And I absolutely love my job. I'm really blessed. And it just occurred to me after some point that so many kids are growing up with so much shame around their sexuality. Because it's something we don't talk about, we don't address, and we don't really put into the forefront. Sex education at school is so, abysmal. Even in the more liberally minded schools, it still tends to be very lackluster. And what no one really prepares us for is how to have healthy and safe and, wonderfully fulfilling intimate relationships as adults. And that is, I think, one of the most important things we'll ever do. So I decided to write a parenting book on called No Shame, because it's all about real talk with your kids. And, I also really would love to write a sequel where I really talk to kids directly, or really talk to millennials and young adults about how to get the shame and blame out of their game. So
I love it. And it's so important because you're right, we don't talk about these things. When I in my research with shame, and what I'm learning about the biological aspect of shame and how it gets wired in the nervous system of not feeling good enough and how it impacts so much of our lives. It isn't necessarily something that we did or didn't do. It's the way we feel about ourselves. And so when we talk about sex, it's so loaded with, it's loaded. It's just a loaded topic that there's shame, the stories that come out all over, from our sexuality. I have a ton of questions for you, but tell us first a little bit more about the book. I love it. No Shame. And you just talk about so many things. Like you just go in.
Hold up the book, so I'm going to put on my green glasses, my green reading glasses to imagine. But go ahead.
You talk about relationships. You talk about different age related pieces. Talking to your children about sex and really having those hard conversations. So tell us a little bit about that, and then again, I have a lot of questions that I will continue to ask.
Well, a lot of parents, young children say, why would I buy a book like this? I don't have to worry about this till later. And I say, no, a lot of the book, you've read it, is about young children because you set up the foundation of sex education as a young child. Now, you're not talking necessarily about intercourse, but you're talking about boundaries and intimacy and biology, right? So that's what you're laying the foundation. So as soon as they can talk is when you start talking about sex. And it's not about, it's about, things like who gets to touch you in what situations, giving your child the language to express their boundaries. Like, that hurts when you touch me like that. Please don't spank me, and that way, like my daughter in the playground, a boy, spanked her on the butt, and she was like, no, that's my body. No way. And I like, cause she had heard it from me, and I was like, never let anyone touch you in a way that you don't like. That doesn't feel good. If you get touched, it should be pleasurable, unless it's something like a shot at a doctor, but that's different, right? So we have these conversations, and we talk about pleasure. We talk about touch and what feels good, because that's the foundation of sexual intimacy, but it's not necessarily about sex itself. And of course, there's the biology piece that starts very young, sperm, egg, seed, the basics. And then you're layering in, the more difficult conversations when they're teenagers.
Yeah. And I love that part of the book where you have like specific things like what to say if someone wants to have sex and you don't want to have sex. And I love it, like scripting. Here's what you say. Like, give us an example can you think of it?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I wish I had done this with my parents. I was little, because not little, when I was a teenager, because I remember being in these situations and being so shamed and so horrified about expressing my boundaries. For example, I remember, hey, if you don't finish me, like, I'm gonna get blue balls. Like, I actually heard that one. I'm like a dumb. I thought that was a real thing, and so it's like, no, you could practice. Like, I know you can take care of that yourself, like, just to know that, like, it's okay to, or if we don't have sex, I'm not going to be your boyfriend, and then you'd be like, well, if that's a requirement to be your boyfriend, maybe we're not meant to be, or the condom thing, it's just giving them the language and to practice it, because the first time you don't want the first time they have to figure out what to say be the moment in which they're trying to set the boundary, because we all know that, like, rehearsing these things ahead of time are going to make your communication skills more effective. And also, this is the kind of stuff that's going to keep them safe from sexual assault and all that, being able to express. I can't even tell you how many teenage girls in my practice end up having sex because they don't know how to say no. They didn't want to do it. They were giving the nonverbal communication no, but the guy, kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and they never were firm enough. And it's kind of like, it wasn't really rape, but it wasn't wanted,
Right. And I work with a lot of the college girls here at CU, and the stories that I hear about the way these boys treat them. And then they have, well, I've had several people say, well, I invited him over. I started it. And then they start doing things. I mean, you talk about porn in there and some of the things that are, some of the violent acts and the pornography. And so, there was this one client of mine, and she said, I told him to stop, and he kept doing things, and he was hurting me. But I invited him over. So I felt like, it's so confusing. So anyway, she has a great boyfriend right now, which is a wonderful success story so far. We'll see, knock on wood. But I talk a lot to my girls about respect, mutual respect. And, there's such a hookup culture here, and it breaks my heart. It's like, oh, so.
Well, some advice I can give to millennials and, college co-eds, if there are any listening, is to express your boundaries ahead of time of the date. So you can actually say, hey, I'd love to go out with you, but this is going to be a waist-up date, And so even if they come over, let's say, you're going to be like, remember, we talked about a waist-up only date, And so, and I've actually heard from many men that this is actually very relieving, because they are also trying to perform and they don't know what you want. And so if you just kind of say, hey, this is a waist-up only date, it takes the pressure off of them.
Yeah,
so
I like waist-up only date. That's a good way to put it.
So we can make out and we can, cuddle, but waist-up.
Yeah. So I'm here talking to Dr. Lea Lis, the Shameless Psychiatrist. I'm Dr. Patti Ashley. Let me know if you're here. Say hello in the chat room. People looks like they're coming and going. So just say hello. If you have any questions, ask us. But the other thing that really struck me was just, again, I think that's really good, teaching the boys, because I think they're confused, right? Because the girls are, well, okay, let me backtrack. So the middle school kids that I've worked with in the past, I don't work with middle school kids anymore. I'm just high school and college and up. I would hear the same thing all the time. It's like, you're either considered a slut or a prude, right? And so there was no middle ground for girls to pick, What do you say to that? I mean, is there a way to define what's in between those two? Because the girls seems like they had to pick a side.
I mean, I that's, I haven't really heard that much in the Hamptons, but I think it's absurd to be labeled. I don't think we should be labeling anybody as anything. Is a prude or a whore, and neither way is particularly useful. We're all sexual beings. We all are trying to. We have our own pace, and it's a shame to hear that. And I guess I would just tell them to defy and say, I'm just a girl. I'm not either one, or I'm just a person. Person is even better. What I hear more about in the Hamptons, and I don't know if this is your experience, but this whole, it's not okay to want to be more than friends with benefits. None of them want to seem needy. It's okay to hook up, but they're not supposed to expect anything, and any kind of relationship or a phone call back. And if they do, they're considered needy and overzealous, and it's all this oh, we're just talking. And I'm like, what the heck does that mean? Talking? Wait, you mean you're having sex? But I don't get it. And so it's this kind of cultural norm, and the guys feel it too, boys and girls, men and women, that neither one wants to be known as someone who might possibly want an intimacy beyond sex. It's uncool.
Yeah.
I don't.
Well, and I think that's a split too, like the slut and the prude. There's also this, we hook up or we have relationship. There's no and this is what gets to me is, and that's why I love your work so much, because you also talk about relationships and emotional intimacy and things like that. I think, when we talk about, do we have sex or not have sex, and are we cool because we have sex or we haven't had sex, that's just a piece of the whole conversation. And for me, it's how do we create this emotional literacy and agency for our young people, where they can understand what it's about. So.
Emotional literacy, I love that. That is wonderful. I want you to talk more about that. But as a parent, right, the best thing that could happen to my teenager is that they have an intimate sexual relationship when they're ready, but still in my house. So when they leave, they feel equipped to deal with the emotions and all of that. They've had practice. I worry we're telling all these kids to wait, not get attached, not, we're almost pushing them to have casual sex, because we're why should you get serious until you're ready, out of college, because it's never going to go anywhere. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, this is their opportunity to practice what will be a very important thing for them when they have children, to have a healthy, intimate relationship. So they should be practicing this now, not when they're 14, but 16, 17, 18, they're ready for that kind of thing. And we need to be there for them and helping them learn how to communicate, and there for when they break up and they're a basket case, they need us. And this whole idea that we're not going to let them try it out or practice now, and then we're just going to throw them out into the big bad world. No wonder why the divorce rate is going to be 60%,
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of start with the early years and then go to the later years, but I'm bouncing all around, because I think, again, when we talk about sex play, so many parents find out that their children are exploring things with their friends. What do you have to say about that? How do you explain what's healthy and appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, so you talk about that in the book. I mean, we are, designed to be sexual from birth. Like, this is not just like, just because we're kids doesn't mean, we masturbate, we have sexual pleasure. We see what's going on in the movies. Children, they see their parents and they want to play. They want to practice being an adult. That's an important part of play in general. A lot of play is practicing being an adult, right? That's why you play with Legos, because you want to build things. That's why a lot of play is practice, and role modeling what we see our parents do. So, sexualized play is very normal. And, I think, playing boyfriend, girlfriend, or having your dolls kiss, or, playing doctor, that's all like very developmental. But, of course, there are a certain subset of kids who have been sexually abused or assaulted, or they have had exposure to pornography, and they may have, inappropriate boundaries around those things. So you really have to talk to your kids about like what is okay and what is not okay. And obviously, genital contact or contact, hands to, I always say like, this space, very clear, those are off limits. You're your child. Like, you can't touch anybody else's and they can't touch yours. But, the rest of it of like, like fake kissing or, pretending to be on a date, or so that kind of sexualized play is very normal.
Yeah. 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 And I think, again, in the book, you talk so much about what to say to children to help them understand that, because when it does go beyond normal, and the child is out in the playground or something, and, there's some sort of sexual assault, they need to know that they can say no and they can set a boundary. And that, a lot of times kids feel ashamed. If they don't have these conversations, which again is why I think what you're doing is so important, to help people continue, feel comfortable, because again, it's that shame. Oh gosh, sex? We could talk about sex? I don't know, but if you've established that relationship with your children early on, hopefully they feel comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could be I think there are a lot of parents who have very open relationships. You said you did with your kids offline. And I'm hoping my kids will come to me when they're ready to have sex. So we'll have an open discussion about where it would happen and what kind of contraception they would use and how they feel about it. And I can be part of the collaboration of like figuring out when they're actually ready. And I'm hoping that will happen. And, and I think it's such a wonderful intimacy and loving relationship you can have with your child if you open up those doors.
Yeah. And it helps them feel safe. It helps them feel not so ashamed of something that, again, I guess what I was trying to say earlier about the how shame is so loaded in terms of sexuality. When you look historically at, sex was, especially women, women couldn't have sex, unless you were serving a man, right? Yep. And it was up to the man to decide when he wanted it, and all that changed in the last century. And now I think, women are trying to, and men are trying to figure out, well, what is that healthy sexuality? What is that about? And, again, the emotional literacy that goes with that, to me, I think is so important. It's like, how do you have that mutual respect and share this part of yourself? That's about as close as we can come to another human being, right? And so there's so much more inside us as human beings besides our physical body. And what is that all about? So, and there's no shame in it, because it's a beautiful thing, sex.
Oh no, it's amazing. It's wonderful. I mean, and I think it's, the conversation about like the ways, I say like for little kids, I'm always like, nobody's allowed to touch you from here to here except for your doctor, your parent, your guardian, whoever it is that's cleaning you, whatever. But then it's also like, but when you get to be a teenager, people, when you feel ready, you may allow people to touch you and your, on your breast or on your vulva. And it's like, and that will feel really good. And there'll be a time and a place for that as well. So that's why I just like, you just throw it out on the table, I don't hide it, it is what it's going to be like that.
Yeah. I had I had a booth set up in town not too long ago, because I was promoting a trip I'm doing to France, which actually is postponed again. But this young girl, she was like college age, she starts talking about how she went to school in France and how in their coursework, they had to actually put condoms on these dummy bodies, and they had to talk about, putting on the condom and talk about sex. And it was just such an open, incredible experience. And I don't think that we're doing that in the schools here by any means. I think we're having this kind of watered down version. But the French people love pleasure, right? They just love enjoying themselves. And so, but then they're teaching these kids how to have safe sex. And it doesn't seem like rocket science to me. But again, the shame around it has kind of, made people kind of go, ooh.
Well, there's no mandates for sexual education in the United States. Every state has their own rules. And so children are getting vastly different sex education, depending on the state you live in or the school you go to. And that to me is sad. And if you look at and some are getting only abstinent-only education, which is absurd, because, it's like trying to tell a kid, you're not allowed to talk or want food. It's kind of like, what? We're not going to talk about food so you don't eat,
Right.
Good luck with that.
Or here's a story I heard from a client this week, speaking of food, because there's disordered eating in the family. And she said, I remembered when I was about 5 years old, or probably earlier, we'd go out to dinner and we'd order a dessert and the family would share it. We'd get halfway through and the dad would say, we're done. And he'd pour salt on the cheesecake so they couldn't eat it anymore. And I said, I'm imagining what that little, and that's when I talked about the French and how when you go to France, you wonder why the French women are so thin. And, somebody had said to me, it's because they just take their time and they enjoy the pleasure of the food. It's not about this hurry up and have some sort of standard that you have to meet like we have here in the United States of, we got to look a certain way, you got to do a certain thing, got to do it fast. Whereas in France, it's just about enjoying everything. And I just thought, how horrible. Could you imagine being 5 years old and in the middle of a delicious piece of cheesecake and then your dad pours salt on it? Right? So I think it's a food, sex, all these things that are natural to us. And how do we learn how to enjoy them and, be safe?
Yeah. And that's what I want, and what's very interesting, the more you talk about sex with your kids, the less likely they're actually put themselves in an unsafe situation. And it's never been correlated to kids wanting to have sex earlier. As a matter of fact, studies show parents who talk to their kids about sex are more likely to have children to wait, because what is part of the discussion, you're not just like, oh my God, this is shameful, so I'm just going to do it quick and not think about, condom use or what I'm going to do, or if I'm putting myself in an unsafe environment. When you give them that moment to stop and pause and be like, oh yeah, I need to get a condom. Oh yeah, I need to find a safe room to do this. Oh, what if he doesn't call or she call me the next day? How am I going to feel about it? Like, this is all the questions you need to be asking. And all of a sudden they're like, you know what? I think I'm going to wait until I can figure all this stuff out.
Yeah. So much about communication. That's what I keep hearing you say. It's really, how do you have those shameless conversations, and then you normalize it as opposed to it's a really shameful thing.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your work with, how do you help your college, I hear you work with a lot of college kids. So how do you help them reduce their shame? And I saw your courses and.
Yeah. Well, like I said, for me, this whole, their idea of being a prude or a whore and the hookup culture and how that it feels to them to, it's a lot of peer pressure, which you talk about in the book too. It's, wanting to fit in. And next month, I'm interviewing a disordered eating specialist, Danita Johnson, because I think there's so much similar to what I see in these girls in the hookup culture. And then there's this thing where they, a lot of binging, which is so normal. They call it pulled trig. Have you heard that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, they overeat and they want to drink, so they make themselves vomit. They're like, it's like they rallied to do this. Same thing with the hookup culture. So we're going to go out and we're going to hook up. It's like, so for me not to seem like a prude, because I certainly enjoy sex and I think it's a beautiful, wonderful, incredible thing. But I am older too, so people see that as, the, old age, kind of thing. But I think I do pretty good with it. Just kind of normalizing it, just saying what I just said, sex is a great thing. It's, there's nothing wrong with it. We've, things have changed so much in terms of what that means. How do we then, pay attention? It's really about mutual respect. That's what I say, and having that conversation with the person you're with, that they can respect your, your need, what you want. And again, like I said, I have a couple success stories sort of so far, which I'm waiting, because they're in these relationships. They're like, he's really kind, and he's really like, we can talk about this stuff. And I'm like, yes, you can do this, but it's tricky.
Yeah, I agree. And I wrote a couple of really fun blog posts on hookup culture, and I think the ones that what I kept saying is like no next day ghosting. Like you need to like teach your boys and girls, for that matter, about hookup culture, and how, like, just like you would teach them to hold a knife and fork, and you would teach them manners. Like there are manners that you need to have in the hookup culture, and one of them is like no next day ghosting. I mean, it's just so wrong, and like, be very explicit in your boundaries. Never hook up with a drunk person, no next day ghosting, all those things. Like you need to sit your kids down. You can look at my blog post and just be like, these are the 10 things like I expect from you as my son, because I didn't raise you to be like that. I didn't raise you to eat with your, like a pig in a trough either. Like you need to be better, you need to reflect our family values, and this is our family values.
Yeah. And I think it is so important to teach boys and girls, men and women, like you said, that, to me, again, respect is the word I come back to. What does that mean? And, how do we have that experience of enjoying our sexuality, and we pay attention to what the other wants and needs and what their boundaries are. But again, easier said than done. So,
I mean, I did a podcast with Allison Camarera from CNN and her two teenage girls, which is one of the most fun ones. You guys should all check it out on her podcast. And she talked about her teenage girls, talked about, how they're worried they will never even find anyone because mom and them have held, they don't want to be a part of the hookup culture. So they're afraid they're never going to find anyone to have sex with because they don't want to hook up. And this is like a deep fear. And then she told me recently that her oldest daughter did find a boyfriend who was really kind. And, after that podcast, I had to laugh because, I could see their fear. Like either I'm going to have sex in this hookup culture, or I'm never going to find one who respects my boundaries, and because it doesn't exist in society anymore. I said yes, it does. And I was like, you manifest it. If you manifest it, they will find you.
Yeah, they're out there. That's right. And then there's the whole story about, well, the guys who treat me right, I don't like, that whole story, and so they don't want to build a relationship with the good guys, and so kind of finding that middle ground in terms of what do I really want in my partner and my relationship, and that's okay. And you can manifest it. And so, like I said, I'm going to say it now. I don't know if 6 months from now it'll be the same, but these two young women that I've been working with, have found some really decent people, and they're really enjoying, being in a different kind of relationship. So I think it's possible, but I think that's a really good point. They're like, well, nobody else is out there. Well, this is what everybody else is, just what we do. So again, having that conversation and having the, emotional literacy.
Well, it doesn't, it's like everything you say to your kids, like all the other kids are, allowed to do this, that, and the other. Like, you're not like the other kids. That's not our family values. Like, we're better than that, and I just, that's, we're better. We're different. We think differently. We have manners. We have and it's okay to be like, it doesn't matter what society does. This is our family values. Our family values might be different from everybody else's, and that's okay. It's like we might hold ourselves to a different, and I think that's good. It creates a little bit of like family pride. Like we're the least family. We do things the way we do things, and we're not going to subscribe to this sort of like hookup culture. We're not going to fat shame people. We're not going to, we're not going to, be fearful of our sexuality. We're different,
Yeah.
Right on. And high five.
So it's not a question, it's a statement we have from Trisha saying, I find that abstinence helps weed out people that aren't worth my time.
Right
So
on.
you want to speak to that a little bit, Dr.
I
Lea?
think what she means is that she tells whoever she's potentially dating that she is not going to have sex with them to make sure that they're not just in it for that reason. I think that's what she means,
Mm,
right?
we'll see. Well, so let us know. Um,
And if that's what she means, I think that's wonderful. She's setting a boundary,
mhm,
like I'm not going to have sex on my first date or my second date or my third date, or I don't know how long the abstinence goes for because I'm not exactly sure. And
mhm.
so then she can really get to know someone and make sure that they want to be intimate with her. They're not just looking for sex. And I think that's beautiful. As
Yeah.
I will sometimes say waist up only dates. Like I'll go out with you, but it's going to be a waist up date because I want to kiss and I want to hug and I want to pet, but I don't want sex.
Yeah.
And that's an effective strategy for teenagers or for anybody.
Mhm. I love that. A waist update. It's a great way to put it. Um, yeah. Yeah. And I think the thing, again, I see so much of this all or nothing. Like abstinence means, again, back to being the prude as opposed to, we're just going to have a waist update for a little while and get to know each other. I mean, I think there's so much conversation we need to have about there's so much more in between. It's either this or that. Abstinence to me means not necessarily forever, not until we get married, like it was used to supposed to be many years ago. If that ever really happened, I think sometimes it did, but it's more about
Well, back
date.
in the day, in my mom's day, they were married by 18, 19 years old. My mom was married at 19. It's not that hard to be abstinent until 19.
Right,
But now, if
right.
your 19-year-old daughter came to you and said she wanted to get married, you'd probably fall off the chair. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's just culture is changing. And so to expect a child to be teen to be absent until they're 32 or whenever you get married, the average age, of people actually getting married is like between 25 and 27, and the average age of first birth is like up in educated women is up to 32. So it's like that's an absurd,
Yeah,
it's a very different culture.
yeah, yeah, yeah. When I got divorced, which has now been like 25, 30 years ago, there's a book out called The Rules. Have you heard of that?
Yes. Oh my God. I never. Oh yes. I think I read that too back in the day.
But one of the things was, the 8-date rule that you don't have sex until the 8th date. And so it was hilarious, going out on these online dates with people. And I would say that I have an 8-date rule, and they would be, well, do phone calls count? Do, you know, right? And then the ones who would just like blow me off because that wasn't okay. And to me, I felt like, wow, that's really good information for me to have. That if you can't wait for 8 dates, and again,
Love that.
does that
That's
book
so good.
fall into the prude category? I mean, again, it's like, I think it's really about, again, our personal space is really valuable, and we have to, honor that. And there's so much in the online dating and the Tinder and the, Bumble and everything. It's not about dating and getting to know people. It's about, let's have sex because it feels good, and how soon can we have it? And I think, again, these are such important conversations.
Well, it's also very interesting because a lot of my friends who are men who date men, they have way different, views on sex than women who date men. And it's I see that they are more likely to have hook up really quickly,
Mhm.
even like with several partners in one day, which is something most women wouldn't do, and new partners in one day. And I think it's interesting how the culture shifts in different kinds of gender dynamics too. And I'm just bringing it up. I have nothing to say about it.
Oh, it's true. One of my best friends is a gay male, and yeah, we've had that conversation before. I said, "Don't you think it's different?" And he and that kind of culture, and he said, "Absolutely." So I don't think there's any right or wrong here. I think it's really, again, about mutual respect and how we all choose to do that. That's the word I keep coming back to.
But I will say this: when it comes to teenagers, I feel like when whether it's two teenage boys, a girl and a boy, whatever compilation, I think it's best to start out intimate and monogamous. because that lays the foundation for a healthy, intimate journey later on. I mean, later on, you can do the S&M. Later on, you can have the threesome. Later on, you can, but you got
Yeah.
to start off in a very stable house, before
Yeah,
you can start.
safe. It needs to be a safe container, right? Like anything else
Yeah.
in life, we want a safety around whatever we're exploring. But I think that again, the split is when it becomes shame is bad. I mean, sex is bad. It's shameful. Then it's really hard to find that safe container, which is what you're doing with your work. Is you're opening up the conversation to create that, which is great.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it was really, I have to go soon. So are there any other questions? And so we can wrap up. And I really enjoyed talking with you today.
No, it was super fun. No, I mean, I could probably ask you a bunch more, but I think, is there anything else you want to say, last words, and then you can tell people how to find you and all that good stuff.
Oh, yeah. I think the last words are, around get the shame out of your life and your parenting. Also, by looking at your own internalized shame. Like, you can only be as good of a parent as you are a person in some ways. Like, and if you don't deal with your own shame, you're going to pass it down to your kids. So, if you're harboring a lot of shame around our sexual trauma, try and deal with it and get help for it, because that will make you into so much better of a parent. So, and then, and you can find me at shamelesspsychiatrist.com, or on Instagram, Shameless Psychiatrist. Check out, I'm now on Mighty Networks, which is a really cool social media platform that doesn't have any advertisements. And you can also find me there. If you go onto my website, you can find out how to sign up for that and ask me personal questions, ask me a question, and I'll answer it.
Great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Pleasure.
Leah's book is No Shame, Real Talk with Your Kids about sex, self-confidence, and healthy relationships. And and my website's pattyashley.com. And thanks so much for spending time with us.
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Bye-bye.